The 20th century gave rise to two new and unique forms of authoritarian culture that severely challenged the free market capitalism and liberal democracy of the Western world. One was communism, the other was fascism. Communists believed all humans were equal in nature, but some classes of humans had oppressed some other classes all through history. The solution was to abolish all classes and to form a classless society, if necessary, by force. Fascists believed that people were not equal by nature, and that the only way people could live together in peace and harmony was for the superior people and the superior nations to be in charge, if necessary, by force. Well, in the 20th century, both communist and fascist ideas became secular religions that led to totalitarian dictatorships that committed unspeakable crimes against humanity. In both cases, communist and fascist, the immediate cause was the devastation left by the First World War from 1914 to 1918. The Communist Challenge was addressed in Part 4 of this series. This program, Part 5, will deal with the Fascist Challenge. The most serious fascist challenge in the 20th century came from one of the most educated and advanced industrial countries in the world, Germany. In the late 19th and early 20th century, Germany was one of the leading countries in the world in science and technology, in the arts, in education, in literature and music. Germany had a small but long-established and highly creative and productive Jewish population that contributed far beyond their numbers to this German cultural leadership in science, in business, and in the arts. While there was anti-Semitism in Germany before 1914, it was no more prevalent, probably less so, than in many other Western and Eastern European countries, like France, Austria, Poland, and Russia. In the 19th century, Germany also created a social welfare system that was probably the most advanced in the world, pioneering in health, old age, and accident insurance provided by the state. It also had the most organized trade union and social democratic movements. On the other hand, while there was an elected assembly, it was relatively powerless. The real power in what was called the Second Reich was in the hands of rigidly authoritarian, paternalistic, and conservative princes like Otto von Bismarck and Kaiser Wilhelm II. It was Bismarck, given credit for unifying the German Empire in the 19th century, who said he ruled not by speeches and persuasion, but by iron and blood. Well, all of this changed radically when Germany lost the First World War, an unprecedented catastrophe to all European countries, but especially catastrophic for Germany. After losing this war to France, Great Britain, and the United States, a defeated and demoralized Germany with great difficulty formed the first democratic government it had ever had. It was called the Weimar Republic. Still believing in an outdated zero-sum idea of wealth, the victorious Allies imposed bitterly harsh and vengeful conditions on the defeated nation that made it virtually impossible for the fledgling democracy to govern effectively. Among the most destructive of the reparations were the forced removal of much of Germany's industrial capacity, unrealistic financial reparations of over 100 billion marks, and then the occupation in 1923 of the industrial Ruhr Valley when Germany could no longer pay the reparations. One result was an economically ruinous inflation in the early 1920s that impoverished many small farmers and businessmen. At the same time, it strengthened the hand of some large industrialists who profited in the runaway inflation by borrowing large sums from the state and then paying them back in marks now worth a fraction of the amounts they borrowed. In the early days of the Weimar Republic, the most dangerous political challenge to the new democracy came from the communists. In 1919, for instance, communist parties, encouraged by the newly communist and triumphant Soviet Union, succeeded in briefly establishing a communist state in Bavaria and mounted other revolutions in Saxony, in the Ruhr Valley, and in Berlin itself. Nearby, a communist state led by Bela Kun was set up in Hungary. Unlike the Soviet Union, none of these communist states lasted very long. In the German case, the Weimar Republic quickly crushed the communist insurgencies by unleashing a new police force of disgruntled soldiers, the Freikorps, who arrested and executed more than 1,000 communists, including two internationally famous left-wing leaders, Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. The communists remained a serious threat in 1919, but the death knell of the nascent German democracy was not rung by the communists, but by the fascists, in particular by the extraordinary leadership of one particular fascist, Adolf Hitler. His odyssey began in 1913. A lonely young man just arrived by train from Vienna. He walked past this beer hall and down a nearby street in the student district of Munich, Germany, looking for a place to stay. He knew no one in Munich, but he knew this was where he would begin. Above a tailor shop here on Schleisamstrasse, he rented a dingy small room, just big enough for a bed, a dresser, a single chair, and a table. At this table, Adolf Hitler began his remarkable career. It was shortly after he moved to Munich that World War I began, the war that so traumatized European society. Hitler enlisted in the German army to fight France and Great Britain. He rose to corporal and fought bravely in the front lines in France. Like many other soldiers and civilians, he felt betrayed and demoralized by Germany's defeat. When he returned to Munich, he looked for reasons, for scapegoats. In his small room in Munich, he found what he thought was the answer. The Germans lost, said Hitler, because they were betrayed, stabbed in the back by the communists, by democratic politicians, and above all, by the Jews. To recover, Germany needed to destroy communism, abandon democracy, get rid of the Jews, and build a disciplined new world order under the leadership of the most noble, the most pure, the most intelligent and capable human beings, pure Germans, pure Aryans. This new world order would strike down the communists, the compromising politicians, and the money-grubbing Jews. In their place would arise a new society, led by an Aryan Third Reich that would for once and all establish justice, harmony, and peace, first across Europe and finally around the whole world. And if a few thousand or a few million non-Aryans, communists, Jews, and reactionary capitalists got in the way, so much the worse for them. They would have to be eliminated, wiped off the face of the earth, for the good of the Volk, for the good of the people, for the good of the world. Now, these ideas were not original with Hitler, although he did put his own virulently anti-Semitic stamp on them. Nor was his the only movement in these directions that have been loosely labeled fascist. Unlike Marxist-Leninist communism, there is no simple way to define fascism. At about the same time, Hitler was organizing to promote National Socialism, Nazism for short. Another strongman named Benito Mussolini was challenging the rise of liberal democracy in Italy. It was Mussolini who coined the term fascism to describe his movement that took dictatorial power in Italy in 1922. And in the 1930s, a short-lived Republican government in Spain was overthrown in a bloody civil war, and an army general, Francisco Franco, took charge, forming a fascist dictatorship in Spain that lasted well into the post-World War II period. Other strong men led similar fascist-like movements to power in the 1920s and the 1930s, in Portugal, in Brazil, in Slovakia, in Argentina, Chile, and other countries that had so far only flirted with liberal democracy, had never really firmly emerged from agriculturally based authoritarian societies. In the Far East, too, Japan was governed by a fascist-style government that brutally attacked Korea and China in the 1930s to expand its natural resource base and to carve out a sphere of influence over half a continent. The common threads in these fascist movements were leadership by a charismatic strongman, often a military general, supported often by rich industrialists and sometimes by religious groups. Suppression of civil rights and civil liberties in the name of national patriotism and unity. A huge buildup of military power. Suppression of trade unions and other non-government-sponsored groups. Firm control of all communication media. Reducing representative assemblies and independent judiciaries to impotence. Subversion of the rule of law in favor of the rule by executive decree. Strong emotional appeals to the supposed superiority of one particular human, ethnic, religious, or national group, along with the alleged inferiority of other human, ethnic, religious, or national groups. And finally, heavy reliance on brute force to intimidate citizens and to enforce dictatorial decrees. Notice that with a few exceptions, these same characteristics apply to communist movements as well as fascist. As many scholars today claim, it's not a very long step from far-left communism to far-right fascism. In 1923, Hitler made his first public move to bring his fascist ideas into power. He led a small band of followers in an attempt to overthrow the democratic government in Germany by a show of street force in Munich. The so-called beer hall putsch failed. Hitler was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 5 years in prison, with parole possible in 12 months. Unlike the prisons and concentration camps he was later set up in Nazi-controlled Germany, the Weimar Republic prison he was confined to in Landsberg, near Munich, was more like a hotel. He was well treated and able to meet regularly with his followers, laying more careful plans for the eventual triumph of his fascist revolution. In Landsberg prison, he also had leisure to write his soon-to-be famous autobiography, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. Hitler was released on parole after serving his 12 months. Meanwhile, conditions in Germany were deteriorating. Unemployment was soaring and poverty increasing in the wake of a worldwide depression deepened by the New York Stock Exchange crash in 1929. Crime and street fighting in German cities was particularly galling to the hard-working, order-loving German people. Both were increasing every week, it seemed, instigated by either the communists or the Nazis, each side trying to create political chaos out of which they could take power. The democratic politicians of the Weimar Republic could not agree on ways to curb the violence and reduce the fear. And the way was paved for a savior, and Adolf Hitler had spent years rehearsing to fill that role. The communists, led by Lenin and Trotsky, had little popular support in Russia when they came to power in a military coup in 1917. By contrast, Hitler had gained wide support in Germany by the time he made his move for absolute power. To get this support, he made brilliant use of a new mass medium, radio, as well as theatrically staged mass rallies in Nuremberg, Munich, Berlin, and other German cities. By 1930, his growingly popular National Socialist Party won 18.3% of the popular vote in Germany, and by 1932, this increased to 37.3%. Shortly thereafter, he was able to maneuver the politicians and get himself appointed chancellor. And within a month, he took advantage of a suspicious fire in the Democratic Assembly Hall, the Reichstag, to decree emergency powers and to become absolute dictator of the Third Reich. Now the way was clear, and in short order he carried through on his promises. He shut down the Democratic Assembly, arrested many of the politicians as well as the communists, throwing most of them into jail and soon into new concentration camps like Dachau, built from scratch in 1934. Unlike the Landsberg jail, none were paroled and few survived. The new National Socialist government quickly moved to destroy all non-Nazi organizations. Even local sporting clubs and bridge clubs were shut down unless they could be certified to be Nazi-directed. At the beginning, he did not arrest many Jews, but he made it clear that Jews could no longer vote or hold office. And he sponsored virulent anti-Semitic propaganda, ordering his police to look the other way when it resulted in Jews being beaten, robbed, their homes and synagogues destroyed. In this anti-Semitic campaign, he played upon centuries-old myths and prejudices that had been condoned and often promoted in Germany and other parts of Europe by Christian leaders all the way back to Martin Luther and before. The Jews, said the myths, poisoned the wells during the days of the Black Death, murdered and ate Christian babies in satanic rituals, and worst of all were the evil people who had killed Jesus Christ. For such crimes, Jews deserved the contempt of all pious Christians. Jews were also, Hitler preached incessantly, the moneybags of international finance, conspiring to destroy traditional German culture, take over the world, and govern it with a godless, liberal, communist democracy. At the beginning of his rule, the majority of the German people supported his decisive actions. Street fighting came to an end. Petty crime was reduced. The unemployed were set to work, building new parks, new high-speed highways, and a new kind of people's automobile, the Volkswagen. Children were enrolled in Hitler Youth programs. Exercise, health, sports, and smiling blonde Aryan faces were the rule of the land. If you had been walking the streets of this small north-central city of Northeim, or of Wolfratshausen or Hersching,